How are we doing, folks? It is Friday evening and I am stuck in traffic on the way back from trying to do my Christmas shopping. So I said I will do a review on the CPD stuff that we did with Fergal Kieran yesterday. First of all, really grateful to him coming up. He's an exceptional physio. He really has an excellent thought process when it comes down to injuries. And he's got a CV to boot with Leinster, Chelsea on that. He spoke at many conferences in Dubai, Aspetar. I think he's going to Australia on another trip. So he's really getting his name out there and becoming an expert in the world of hamstring rehab. He, as he stated himself, he's really good at other stuff too, but he's just kind of thrown himself down the gauntlet with the hamstring stuff that everybody is going to him. So his main thought process when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of hamstring is figuring out why people got injured. And to figure that out, you need to look back at the history of what's happened with hamstring injuries over the last couple of years. Valve Performance put out a piece of kit called the Nordic board, and they found that when people did Nordic exercises properly, you increase the fascicle length in the hamstring and you improve the eccentric strength of the hamstring, and injuries go down. Now, there's a caveat to that. What they've studied that a little bit more, and they found it in the sub-elite athletes that are not trained as well as the elite athletes, it works wonders. Why? Maybe sometimes those athletes are not getting up to the full potential that they can do from week to week, whereas the elite athletes are pushed to the limits because their bodies are trained to do so. Maybe one question that's completely off my cuff, but the question hasn't been answered by science yet, but that's maybe my thought on it. Because they did so much with the Nordics, everything was thrown out there and every team started putting in Nordics, but the injury rate in sub-elite went down, but the injury rate in elite athletes has kind of gone up since COVID. And they're trying to figure that out. They're figuring out why. Now, they're secondary to the injury rates going up. They've also looked at where muscles are being worked throughout certain exercises. So your hamstrings are, to keep it quite simple, your hamstrings are composed of your lateral hamstrings and your medial hamstrings. On the lateral side of your hamstrings, you have your bicep femoris, and they're split into two heads, which is long head and short head. And they both have different innervations and attachment points, and they have a different excursion level as well. So the excursion means the angle of the muscle that's being attached from its proximal end to its distal end, and the line of pull of that muscle. So with people that have repeated hamstring injuries, there is this scan that's been brought about, and it's called Springbok. I think it's Springbok Labs. But what they do is they take the MRI scan, and using AI, they're able to recreate a 3D model of the muscle and look at the width of the muscle, the girth of the muscle, the cross-sectional area, whatever you want to call it. And what we do know from science is the larger cross-sectional area, the stronger you are. Now, what they found in people that had recurrent hamstring strains was that there was a bit of muscle atrophy. So the muscle that had been injured the most had gone down in size, but as a caveat to that, what happened was the other muscle, the shorter head, had increased in size. So that you can kind of deduce from that one muscle is starting to take the load of the injured muscle, or the body is trying to redirect load through another portion of the body, and hence the old question, or the old answer, is that the injured muscle is just not strong enough. It's not able to withstand the loads. It keeps on breaking down, and it's just not getting any way better. His ideas around, or Fergal's ideas around rehab, were that we need to start to really hone in on the pathology, respect the healing times. So if you have a muscle injury, you can generally get over that quite quickly. But if you're starting going into intertendon injuries, and if you look at the US or the UK classification of muscle injuries, you have grade 1, 2 and 3, and then you have the area A, B or C. A is muscle, B is musculotendinous junction, and C is tendon. Obviously when you get to B's and C's, they're a little bit more complicated and they take a little bit more time to heal, so you have to respect that healing process, but you also have to try and recruit the muscles around that. So what do we do, and what does that mean for practice in the clinic? It means that just because you're doing an exercise does not mean that you're actually recruiting the muscle that the science says that muscle is supposed to be recruiting for. So you do your EMG studies, and you can, let's say you're doing a hip thrust, and that's going to be proximal hamstring, and that's going to be glute. But for some people that keep on getting re-injured, they might avoid using that area and overcompensate with your synergists, or activate secondary muscles like your lower back pain muscles, your lower back muscles like your erectors. So they'll use their back muscles to try and extend because they don't want to use the proximal hamstrings or the glutes if they had a back injury, or in this case if you had a hamstring injury, you're just overusing your back because you don't want to use your hamstrings either. So it's fairly interesting. It's something that I've always kind of thought that was in the back, right, something's not happening here. We all know about how your body is supposed to work. It produces force through the muscles, the tendons are able to transmit that force, but somewhere, if you look at your lower limbs, that transmission of force is being redirected to away from the area of injury and into another tissue that's not capable of dealing with that load, and then you're ending up getting re-injured because that area is just not strong enough. And it's simply put, like, where you can redirect the force for so long, but at some point in your gait cycle, if you're sprinting, that muscle is going to have to be used. It's designed to be used at certain times of a sprint. That's where most people get injured. And if that's not being used, then you're either not able to sprint 100%, you're not able to go balls out, and you avoid going balls out, and then your performance suffers because you're trying to protect the injured area. And it takes a little bit of time to understand how your system works, and understand what your body is doing when it's trying to avoid an area. It's simply put, it's compensating. And now what we have done, and what we've been doing in the clinic for the last number of while, and some of the other guys that work with me as well would know that I keep on harping on, you need to get your hands on the muscle. People need to understand what muscles they're supposed to be recruiting through exercises, and if they're not recruiting that muscles, they're bypassing that area because they simply don't want to load it. And that's where we got to start with the very, very basic levels. Just honing in, getting your hands on as people are doing the exercises, figure out where they're recruiting muscles from, asking them where they are feeling that muscle working, and if it's not in the area that you want it or you expect it to be working, then you need to do something else, or change the position, or change their intent of where they're applying force down. So let's say you're doing a bridge, or you're doing a box-to-box bridge, you're putting your heel down on the box in front, but are you actually driving that heel down into the ground? You could just be leaving it sitting there and then using your back to actually complete the movement. So not all movements are created equally. You need to be able to recruit other muscles in other muscles in this particular area that you want them to work. And then the last thing that he touched on was fairly interesting, was that we all know that doing exercises will increase muscle size, but what we've struggled with over the last couple of years is what exercises actually increase tendon size. So again, you're doing exercises and your muscles are producing the force, but your tendons are designed to transmit it. When you're doing compound exercises, yes, it will have some sort of relevance in it, especially with you when you're doing your isometrics, your knee push, your calf push. That will recruit a lot of the muscle fibers and the tendon. But what about, how do we do this in an open chain exercise, or how do we do it at lower loads? And what they found in the study is that your Nordics won't increase your tendon size, even though there's a high lot of load going through it based on the levers that you're applying during the Nordic. But your seated hamstring curls are probably one of the best exercises when they're done correctly and you're feeling what's happening with the muscle and they're tempoed correctly, that they will increase the tendon size more so than any of the conventional exercises. So make of that what you will. If you're trying to improve tendon, you need to go higher load and you need to isolate that muscle You need to recruit the muscle fiber type so that it's able to produce 100% of the force and then not compensate in another area. So yeah, overall, in the 2.5 hours that we spent with Fergal, it really gave an insight into the thought provokers, thought leaders in the area of elite level sport. Our job as a private practice physio is trying to figure out, right, I'm not trying to be an elite level sport athlete, but I need to understand the concepts so we can apply them to the general population. And as I said, like 90% of the people who are going to come into us are going to be general population, but how do we apply those principles that they've learned from elite sport and put them into the best rehab program you can give your clients? Yeah, and I think it's this area of really honing back in on the basics, doing the exercises right, understanding educating the patient on where they're supposed to feel the muscle working, and if they're not feeling there, having strategies in place to be able to adapt so they can recruit that muscle fiber and stop avoiding using that area. Then that's your acute level exercises. Then your mid-stage stuff is trying to build up some strength accumulation to make sure that they're actually continuing to feel that muscle, and then you're not overloading them or giving them too much load whereby they've done 3 or 4 reps and they're already starting to compensate in another with one of their synergists. Yeah, and that's the idea of it. So 2.5 hours, really good. Delighted to have them in. I think all the other staff that are with us there will agree that it's an area that all physios need to get better at and going back to the basics. So that's my 2 pence. I'm still stuck in traffic, and I hope that was insightful. And in 2025, you will hopefully be seeing an awful lot more of these videos. And please leave comments, and please, if you find this video has been interesting and somebody might benefit from it, please share it with them and send it on. Okay, thanks guys, take care.